Understood. I'll now write Section 1 as a 650-word faceless narrative script, no headings, no scene notes, no repetition, straight to the point, cinematic in tone, high quality. Here's the script. The Galactic Empire had endured for millennia, stretching across thousands of stars, bound together by arrogance as much as by law. Its fleets were the embodiment of dominance, vast, towering vessels adorned more for display than practicality, each bristling with weapons that had silenced hundreds of rebellions. To its rulers, war was no longer war, it was ritual. They crushed resistance not because they feared it, but because it was expected. And when humanity appeared on the galactic map, their reaction was predictable: mockery, followed by disdain. Reports of humans had circulated for decades, carried by traitors and spies. A late-blooming species, confined to the edge of a spiral arm, with only a handful of colonies and warships that seemed primitive by imperial standards. They were categorized as bold but unrefined, another species to be folded into the Empire's order, or eradicated if they resisted. The Empire had done it countless times. This would be no different. In the Grand Council chambers, voices dripped with condescension. Humanity was described as upstarts, miners who discovered fire, a nuisance rather than a threat. The debate wasn't whether they should be subdued, but how quickly. Some argued for diplomacy, but laughter drowned them out. Diplomacy was for equals. Humans were no equals. They would be shown the full splendor of the Empire's might and made to kneel, as so many before them had done. Admirals reviewed the fleet assignment with practiced boredom. The task was not conquest but humiliation. A formation of battleships, cruisers, and carriers would cross into Sol System, present terms, and if humans hesitated, destroy one of their colonies as demonstration. No one questioned the plan. Why would they? Their empire had never lost to a species as young as this one. Defeat was not even a shadow in their minds. The Imperial Armada departed in flawless symmetry, engines blazing against the void. To the Empire, it was not war, it was theater. Each ship's hull carried gilded crests, relics of ancient victories, trophies meant to awe and intimidate. Their captains believed they were carrying not just weapons, but history itself. Humanity would see the inevitability of submission carved into every gleaming surface. As the fleet approached the solar frontier, messages were prepared in advance. The speech was simple, crafted for maximum effect: unconditional surrender, immediate allegiance, tribute in resources and soldiers. The alternative was annihilation. It had been spoken to dozens of civilizations before, and it always worked. Fear was universal, or so they thought. Yet behind their confidence lurked a complacency so ingrained they no longer recognized it. Their war doctrines had not changed in centuries. Their ships were enormous but inefficient, bloated with traditions that slowed them down. Their command structures relied on ceremony more than adaptability. Against fragmented resistance, these flaws meant nothing. Against something different, something they had never faced, the cracks might widen. But they could not imagine difference. To them, humanity was already defeated in spirit. What was Earth compared to the heart of the Empire? What were human fleets compared to their dreadnoughts? The notion of danger from such a species was laughable. And so the Empire moved forward with unshakable assurance, blind to the irony that laughter itself would soon define their enemy. The Sol System appeared ahead, a modest star with scattered worlds, none of them impressive by imperial standards. Scouts reported human activity, colonies thriving, fleets patrolling. It was confirmation of the obvious, another species proud of its small achievements, unaware of its insignificance. The fleet prepared its opening transmission, rehearsed to echo across every channel, its tone rehearsed for intimidation. The Admiral smiled as he rehearsed the words. Humans of Earth, you are summoned to surrender. Resistance is futile. Defiance will mean extinction. He believed those words were final, as absolute as gravity. He believed they would echo in human minds as they had in countless others. He believed he already knew their response. What he did not know, what none of them could know, was that for the first time in their long history of conquest, their speech would not be met with fear. It would not be met with submission, negotiation, or trembling silence. It would be met with laughter. The Imperial Armada entered the system with thunderous confidence, broadcasting across every human frequency. Their message was grand, formal, and unwavering in tone. It promised annihilation if obedience was not immediate, demanded resources, demanded soldiers, demanded subservience. The words carried the weight of an empire accustomed to obedience. To them, this was not negotiation. It was ritualized victory, spoken before the battle was even fought. On Earth and in orbiting stations, the transmission was received, analyzed, and replayed by governments and commanders who had already anticipated such arrogance. The words were not terrifying. They were absurd. Humanity had known empires before. On their own world, countless rulers had demanded surrender, countless tyrants had promised destruction. Every age had carried its oppressor, every age had produced its defiance. The Empire's broadcast was not original. It was a recycled script in a language humanity understood too well. Across military channels, captains and officers listened, and then laughter spread. It was not forced or hysterical. It was natural, unrestrained amusement at the sheer pomposity of the threat. Men and women who had faced war on Earth, who had buried comrades, who had endured hardship, did not tremble at words from alien mouths. They chuckled, they smirked, they exchanged remarks as though a child had declared themselves ruler of the stars. For the first time in the Empire's history, their ritual fell flat. The alien admiral, awaiting terrified silence, received instead a calm reply that carried a tone of almost playful incredulity. A human voice answered, steady, unshaken, asking why they should kneel to strangers who had done nothing but boast. The voice thanked them for their introduction and laughed openly at their arrogance. There was no aggression in the words, no attempt to bluster. It was the laughter of someone who had already dismissed the threat as ridiculous. To the Empire's officers, this reaction was incomprehensible. Fear was the natural language of the galaxy. Entire civilizations had collapsed at the sound of their ultimatums. And yet here was a species that did not even treat their demands as serious. Their pride was not only ignored, it was mocked. They had been prepared for resistance, but they had never prepared for derision. Human warships advanced slowly, not rushing, not posturing, their formations precise and disciplined. The designs were unfamiliar to the Empire's eyes, smaller than expected, streamlined, built with purpose rather than ornament. Where Imperial vessels carried gilded banners and ceremonial armor plating, human ships were stripped of vanity, every line drawn for efficiency. They did not look like the weapons of children. They looked like predators built for one purpose: survival. The Empire broadcast again, more forceful, attempting to reassert control. Yet even as their voices rose in command, human officers could be heard chuckling through the reply. The message was delivered with absolute clarity: Earth would never kneel. If the Empire wanted a war, they were welcome to test their arrogance against reality. The tone was not defiance laced with fear, but defiance anchored in certainty. The alien admiral faltered. This was no performance he had rehearsed for. He expected trembling compliance, not amusement. His subordinates exchanged uneasy glances, unsettled by the quiet humor of their opponents. In their doctrine, laughter belonged to victors, not to those facing annihilation. And yet the humans laughed before the first shot was fired. The Empire mistook it for madness. They whispered among themselves that humans must be ignorant of true power, that only foolishness could explain such behavior. They did not recognize the truth. It was not ignorance but confidence. Humans were not blind to the Empire's fleet. They saw it, measured it, and still chose laughter. In that moment, before a single weapon discharged, the Empire suffered its first defeat. Their most treasured weapon, fear, had failed. Their opponent did not cower. Their opponent mocked. The laughter carried through every channel, a sound that pierced deeper than any missile. It unsettled captains, gnawed at certainty, and planted doubt in hearts that had never doubted before. For the humans, the exchange was more than defiance. It was a declaration of identity. They had endured too much, fought too hard, evolved through too many trials to bend before another tyrant. Words could not subdue them, and threats only amused them. They had survived their own wars, their own empires, their own near extinctions. What was another would be master to them but another relic destined for failure. The Empire had come to the Sol system to witness surrender. Instead, they became the audience. Humanity had given them a performance they would never forget, an answer no civilization had ever dared give, a chorus of laughter that carried across the stars. The Empire fired first, a thunderous display meant to erase all doubt. A colossal beam lanced across space, striking a human cruiser with the confidence of centuries of conquest behind it. To the Imperial Bridge crews, the outcome was already certain. Their weapons had reduced asteroids to dust, torn moons apart, silenced fleets with a single volley. They expected flames, debris, and silence. What they saw instead was the opposite. The human vessel absorbed the strike, its shielding flaring bright for an instant before fading, unbroken and unmoved. Shock rippled through the Imperial command. They recalibrated, blamed targeting, fired again. More beams lit the void, hammering human formations. The same result, shields holding, ships unshaken. A technology they had never encountered before, perfected by a species they had dismissed as primitive, now nullified their most trusted weapon. Centuries of doctrine cracked in a single instant. Human ships answered not with beams of ceremony, but with brutal precision. Railguns unleashed dense slugs at velocities that bent prediction, kinetic force tearing into Imperial cruisers. Missiles erupted in coordinated waves, each guided by artificial intelligence, weaving through point defenses with unnerving accuracy. Where Imperial ships fired in grand salvos, humans struck with surgical efficiency, every shot designed to cripple rather than merely wound. An Imperial battleship exploded as its magazines were pierced, a sunburst of fire scattering wreckage across the void. Another was disabled by a storm of projectiles that shredded engines and left it drifting helplessly. Within minutes, the Empire's confidence wavered, not from numbers lost, but from the realization that the battle was no longer following their script. On human channels, voices remained calm, laced with humor that cut deeper than weapons. Commanders exchanged jokes as they fired, their tone as casual as if they were at training exercises rather than facing a galactic empire. The laughter that had unsettled the Empire during parley now echoed in combat, each quip timed with the destruction of another Imperial ship. The Empire had faced defiance before. It had never faced mockery woven seamlessly into battle. Imperial officers scrambled, trying to adapt, but their doctrine was shackled by ceremony and hierarchy. Orders moved slowly through their command chain, responses lagged, and their formations, designed to intimidate rather than maneuver, crumbled against human precision. The more they fought, the more their flaws became undeniable. Their massive ships were targets, not fortresses, their ornamented hulls offering no protection against the relentless accuracy of human firepower. One dreadnought attempted to charge, unleashing everything in its arsenal, only to be torn apart from within as swarms of human drones breached its hull, detonating deep inside. Another, a vessel that had presided over dozens of conquests, fell silent after its bridge was struck with a round that pierced through layers of armor as if it were paper. For the humans, every move was executed with practiced discipline. Decades of preparing for the unknown, of planning for wars against threats they had never seen, now paid dividends. They fought not like conquerors but like survivors who knew failure was extinction. Efficiency replaced ceremony. Adaptability replaced arrogance. And it showed in every exchange. Panic spread through the Imperial ranks. Ships collided as formations broke. Captains shouted conflicting orders, their voices betraying fear. The laughter of their opponents filled the channels, a constant reminder that they were not merely losing, they were being ridiculed in real time. What was once the pride of the Empire, a fleet that had crushed civilizations, was reduced to wreckage and silence under the guns of those they had called insignificant. Minutes stretched like hours. By the time the battle subsided, nearly half the Imperial fleet was gone. The survivors retreated in disarray, broadcasting desperate reports of impossible defenses, impossible weapons, impossible enemies. Yet none of those words captured the truth of what had broken them. It was not the shields, nor the railguns, nor the missiles that haunted them. It was the sound of humans laughing as their empire's proudest fleet burned. The surviving Imperial ships limped back into friendly space, carrying tales so unbelievable that even their own commanders hesitated to believe them. Reports described shields that nullified their most devastating weapons, fleets that moved with a precision their doctrines could not counter, and soldiers who did not tremble but laughed while dismantling their power. The Imperial Council convened in urgency, but the chamber was filled not with certainty, only with disbelief and denial. To them, the humiliation was impossible. How could a young backwater species shatter the fleet that had represented centuries of dominance? The voices of dissent clashed. Some demanded retaliation, others whispered caution, but beneath it all was the one truth no one dared speak aloud: fear had entered the Empire's heart. Across neutral sectors, whispers traveled faster than light. Traders and smugglers repeated stories of the impossible. Humanity had not only resisted the Empire but defeated it in open combat. Entire populations who had lived for generations under imperial intimidation listened to the accounts, and found something they had long forgotten: hope. The laughter of humans, carried in fragments of intercepted transmissions, spread like wildfire. What once sounded like arrogance now became a symbol, a reminder that fear was not universal, that even the mightiest could be mocked and broken. Humanity, aware of the attention, seized the moment. They broadcast a message across every available channel, unpolished and unadorned, spoken with clarity that reached across the stars. They declared that Earth and its colonies would never kneel, not to the Empire, not to anyone. Their words were not grandiose. They carried no demand for tribute, no call for vengeance, only a statement of principle: humanity would live free or not at all. They invited any who doubted to come and try to bend them, to test their conviction. It was not a boast but a challenge, and in its simplicity it carried more weight than any imperial proclamation. The Empire dismissed the broadcast as insolence, but it was already too late. Entire worlds under their rule had heard it, and the idea could not be contained. In secret, resistance movements began to stir. Long-dormant groups that had cowered in the shadows found new courage, inspired by a species that refused to fear death. The Empire, once the unquestioned center of power, now faced a threat not measured in fleets or weapons but in ideas spreading beyond their control. Within humanity's ranks, there was no illusion about what had been achieved. Their leaders and admirals did not celebrate with arrogance but with quiet resolve. They understood the Empire would not accept humiliation, that retaliation would come, and that the fight was far from over. Yet they also understood something deeper: the balance of perception had shifted. They were no longer seen as newcomers to be conquered but as adversaries to be reckoned with. That shift alone was victory enough to change the course of history. The council chambers of the Empire echoed with arguments. Some demanded the annihilation of Earth as a demonstration of strength, others cautioned that striking again and failing would shatter their authority completely. Fear and pride clashed, but neither side could erase the truth. The humans had laughed in the face of annihilation, and in doing so had torn apart the very foundation of imperial rule. An empire built on intimidation could not withstand mockery. Their power was no longer absolute, because the galaxy had seen that it could be defied. On distant worlds, ordinary beings repeated fragments of the human broadcast as if it were scripture. "We don't kneel. We don't fear you. Come if you dare." For the first time in generations, the Empire was not the only name spoken in reverence. Another name now carried weight, not through conquest, but through defiance. Humanity had written itself into galactic history with a single battle and a single sound, the sound of laughter where terror was expected. The Empire scrambled to recover, assembling new fleets larger than any they had deployed in centuries, but unease bled through their ranks. Officers trained to project absolute confidence now hesitated in private, their sleep haunted by memories of human warships advancing without fear, their crews laughing even as weapons filled the void. For the first time in their long history, they doubted their own invincibility. Doubt spread faster than orders, eroding discipline in ways no enemy could have engineered. Strategists pored over battle reports, searching for weaknesses in human defenses, but every discovery only deepened their unease. The shields that had rendered Imperial beams useless were beyond their comprehension. The precision of human weapons suggested a level of technological adaptability the Empire had long abandoned. Worst of all, the psychological resilience of humanity could not be quantified. Numbers and firepower had meaning in Imperial doctrine, but what weight did those carry against an opponent who treated death as an inevitability rather than a fear? Humanity expanded quietly, establishing fortified colonies not with the arrogance of conquerors but with the certainty of survivors. Their fleets grew in discipline and number, every vessel forged with the lessons of Earth's turbulent history. They carried no banners, no symbols of glory. Their only statement was their presence, a reminder that they would never again be underestimated. To the galaxy watching, that restraint was more terrifying than any boast. Across Imperial territories, murmurs of rebellion began to coalesce into action. Species long bent under the Empire's heel found courage in the example set by Earth. Secret uprisings sparked in distant systems, their banners raised not in allegiance to humanity but in emulation of its defiance. The Empire, once the unquestioned center of authority, now found itself stretched thin, fighting shadows of resistance fueled by a single example of laughter in the face of tyranny. When the Empire finally dispatched its Grand Armada, the largest gathering of ships in its history, its purpose was not conquest but reassurance. It was theater directed inward, an attempt to remind its own citizens of their supremacy. Yet as the Armada advanced toward human space, hesitation grew. Captains who once reveled in intimidation now wondered what awaited them. Would their weapons matter? Would their numbers make a difference? Would they, too, become objects of ridicule before the galaxy? Fear of perception weighed heavier than fear of defeat. On the human side, preparations were calm and methodical. There was no panic, no desperation. Humanity had already made its stance clear. They would not submit. If another fleet came, it would be met the same way as the first. They did not need to broadcast threats. Their silence was enough. The Empire's own imagination became its greatest enemy, filling the void with visions of failure before the battle was even joined. The Great Armada never tested Earth. Orders stalled, strategies collapsed, and political fractures within the Empire widened. Pride demanded war, but survival demanded restraint. For the first time, survival won. Fleets lingered at the edges of human space and then turned away, leaving behind a scar deeper than any lost battle, the acknowledgement that the Empire had limits. The galaxy understood what the Empire could not admit. Humanity had changed the equation. Power no longer rested solely on the side of intimidation. A species that could not be bent by fear had shown the path for others to follow. Laughter had become sharper than any blade, stronger than any fleet. The Empire's enemies multiplied, and its subjects questioned its right to rule. Humanity did not claim dominion over the galaxy. They did not need to. Their defiance alone reshaped it. Where once their name had been dismissed, now it was spoken with a mix of awe and unease. They were not the largest, nor the oldest, nor the most advanced. They were something rarer, unbreakable. And unbreakable was what the galaxy feared most. The Empire had come to Earth expecting obedience. Instead, they left with a truth carved into their memory: humanity could not be subdued. From that day onward, the echo of their laughter lingered louder than any empire's war drums, a sound that turned certainty into fear and marked the beginning of a new age.